The other question I thought of was, so your organic farm, and we were talking about soil health. Do you have to do like any soil amendments at all? Do you like what do you do to keep the soil healthy other than like chickens
Um,
and stuff?
yeah,
Tenzin's like, do you have an hour or
yeah, right.
three
Like, how much
hours?
time do you want to spend? I have just finished a big deep dive and totally reworked. I've like tried to become my own agronomist here over the last
And he
year and
started
a
a
half,
worm farm.
and I started a worm farm about it and everything. Um,
Perfect.
so when we first started, we basically were just going on the like, well, we're just going to put the vegetable seeds in the ground and try to keep the weeds down and see what grows.
You know,
And
the basics. Yeah.
yep. And I mean, some cover cropping and some animals and this and that. And then we got some manure in from a few different places. And there was some problem. We brought in some weed problems that we now have, for example,
Mm,
and stuff like that. But I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, Stacy had worked on this vegetable farm as an apprentice, and I worked on the animal farm that we worked on together. But I didn't really have any experience with a compost pile besides using it as a way to digest the waste stream, and then spreading it out on pasture, which is pretty forgiving. Um, so we kind of then, after a little while, started buying in poultry manure, composted pelletized poultry manure, which is sort of probably the mainstay of organic vegetable agriculture for fertility.
There are no amount of chickens that we could have that would make it enough fertility. No amount. Like you. That's
not a reasonable amount.
That's the one thing that's really weird about organic farming, that like we rely so much on these CAFOs because of the manure.
Mm-hmm.
Like we completely rely on that, like terrible industry, so that we can have fertility.
Yeah. And yeah, right. That's just sort of another dirty little secret. But so then beyond that, then I started working with an agronomist and saying, hey, and unfortunately he was just about to retire, which is why I started venturing into this world on my own. Let's, instead of just ordering a truck full of this stuff and spreading it all out on one day, the day it shows up, and packing the ground down and spreading it on, ground is at different stages and whatever. And we were just throwing it all out one day in May everywhere that didn't already have vegetables planted. And it just wasn't really fitting. And so then I just got more refined, and I got a fertilizer applicator, so I can put a few 100 pounds in this applicator, and it actually just puts it right in the bed, and I run it ahead and then shape the bed behind with the tractor. And always was too afraid to use our own compost pile to spread back out, because the compost was made out of vegetables, many of which had some sort of disease or pest inoculation already. And so kind of was working both of those angles, and then decided to kind of look more into nutrient density in food, more on the soil remineralization stuff, kind of the Albrecht method of that, and also looking into how to make biological inoculants as well. And so I'm really just kind of starting to get into that. I'm getting to a point where I can apply biological amendments, and I can put down compost, and I can put down targeted fertility in meaningful ways, so that I don't have to get a whole bunch of it and throw it everywhere. I can put it where I want it, when I want it there. And also simultaneously working on figuring out how to take a soil test and really analyze that and figure out what that targeted fertility needs to look like, figuring out how to build rich compost, and how to make nutritional and biological sort of amendment style.
So then what's your secret? Worms?
Well, I'm using worms. So I think that the worm farm does a really good job of taking a lot of compost, making it a smaller amount of much more valuable compost, which is just easier to move out there. So I'm trying to like synthesize it down to the best stuff I can and get that right out where the plants are going instead of flinging bigger piles everywhere. And also then what I'm doing is a multi-stage compost. So it essentially goes through a hot composting phase that's very bacterially dominated, and then it sits and mellows out and becomes more fungally dominated as the worms work through it. So it takes a long time. It's just like a multi-year process, but by the time it's been composted those 3 ways, I feel confident putting it back out on the field, not worrying about creating my own disease vectors.
Right.
We've been working a lot more on the mycelium.
Yeah.
Than we have noticed. We hadn't really made that a focus until like the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is? Isn't that something to deal with the roots? Or is that Go ahead.
It has to do with fungal properties in the soil, and mycelium are specifically, the fungal threads that have a relationship with plant roots. But there's all different kinds of fungal activity that is really helpful in the soil. It helps to, mine the phosphorus out of the subsoil, for example, and remineralize the soil. It helps the plants be more disease and pest resistant. It helps build organic matter in the soil, which, pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it in the ground where it belongs, which is great, but also makes that soil much less prone to erosion, much better at holding water, and basically, it helps in a drought setting and it helps in a flood setting, both. It serves as a sponge that then holds that water and makes it available for the plants, as well as harnessing and promoting more bacteria, which create healthier plants. Healthier plants feed more bacteria, sequester more carbon, create more organic matter in the soil, and that it can really build exponentially if you get things really humming along there. So in our style of agriculture, the one thing that I haven't been able to figure out a way to get around is tillage. So it's annual.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yep. So it's annual agriculture. It's relatively high turnover, and with weed pressure and short growing season, we can't sort of wait for these different windows and wait for weed flushes to pass and stuff like that. We've really got to use all the growing days we get. And on a smaller scale, we could bury everything under a compost mulch, and on a larger scale, we could just have, no-till drill into standing cover crop and stuff like that. But we're in this kind of in-between space that I can't figure out a viable way around. And so what I'm trying to do is focus on, okay, what is the specific limiting factors, and what is the specific sort of ongoing damage that we're causing relative to the benefits that we're building back into there. And so trying to customize that nutrition program to facilitate the things that are our shortcomings in the rest of the management style.
Gotcha.
And that's the big thing. So bacteria can thrive, and you can have a very thriving bacterial population and you till them all up and they're still thriving. You maybe knock them back a little bit, but the fungal population, because it exists in all these networks of small threads, when you chop that up, it really resets the whole thing.
Right.
Aside from working to minimize tillage and bring that into fewer passes and less deep and less aggressive, better timing, better tooling, better timing on the tillage, being able to reduce that impact, we're also trying to actively sort of feed the microbes that are unfed with our management style.
That's pretty cool that you're able to at least you're working on getting like to achieve all that in house, and so like you again the sustainability thing, it all stays here instead of. Are you still going to have to bring in material to build your
I think,
compost?
yeah, probably. I don't think we'll generate enough on farm, most likely. We have some sort of long-term fallow ground that's coming up in a lot of brushy stuff. And I think, down the road, once that brushy stuff got to a certain abundance, we might be able to chip that up. But we're right on the edge of forest country, so there's a lot of logging and stuff that goes on around here, and I can get very good, side stream off of logging industry products that are rich in fungal foods and also have zero possibility of, or essentially zero possibility of weed or disease, pathogenic contamination.
And we have like very little waste. So there's like, you have to have that, material to compost. And like, people always say, oh, I'll take seconds, but we leave the seconds in the field. I mean, not that seconds don't exist, but like, because we're hand harvesting everything, I think when you're using machine, then everything comes in and then you sort in the pack shed. But because we're doing it all by hand, we just leave it in the field. So only the stuff that's going to market is getting brought in the first place. So like the amount that gets put to the compost pile is like really minimal. Compared to the size farm we are, because I'd just be like, let it compost where it's at, let it do its thing there. So we'd almost have to like we'd have to bring in something to compost so that we could then make our own compost to put on our fields.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense.
And it doesn't have to be a boatload of material either. Bringing in a pretty sort of, to my thinking, more benign, more local, more healthful, soil healthful product, rather than bringing in, truckloads of poultry manure from a chicken barn that's been mechanically composted. I feel like pretty great about that.
Oh, you know what another fail was, Tenzin? The mink.
Oh yeah, we got a bunch of mink poop.
Oh, that was a fail. It was so bad.
It's still a running joke in our house.
Oh God. There's like mink farms all over, and that we're like, yeah, mink. They're like full of nitrogen. That'd be great. And they came, and it was like full. It was like full of rocks and like pieces of mink, like. So many
spiky teeth and stuff
like,
were still in there.
And I cut my finger open really bad on a mink tooth.
All these like little pieces of hardware cloth about this big with like sharp edges sticking out every which direction.
And then crabgrass everywhere. Like don't pick up the cheap shit. Yeah. Never buy the cheap shit.
Yeah.
If they say they'll bring it to you for free, you don't want it. We did it twice.
That is so. Hardware cloth and teeth and rocks.
Oh yeah, we still find little skulls out there all the time.
Like little water dishes once in a while.
Oh, lots of water dishes. We pulled those out forever. Oh, it was such a bad thing.
That sounds awful.